A patient sits mid-sentence, mouth open, eyes tracking you across the room. He hasn't moved in 3 years. Not paralyzed exactly, just switched off, like his body forgot the instructions for being a body. Around 1917, hospitals across Europe start filling with cases just like his. Doctors have no name for it yet, no idea it's about to spread across the globe and freeze over 1 million people this same way, some of them for decades. Whatever this is, it hasn't finished arriving. It killed more than half of everyone it touched, far deadlier than the Spanish flu sweeping the same continent. And then, in 1926, it just stopped. No warning, no explanation, and no cause anyone could ever pin down. But the survivors didn't stop. Decades later, one neurologist walked into a ward full of them and tried to wake them up with an experimental drug and told the world a story about it that turned out to have its own problems. So this isn't just a medical mystery. It's 2 of them, stacked. Vienna gets there first. Neurologist Konstantin von Economo starts logging a sleep disorder that matches nothing in his textbooks. Somewhere in France, pathologist Jean-René Cruchet is staring at the exact same puzzle, same year, no telegram between them. 2 doctors, 2 countries, 1 disease neither can name yet, both convinced they've stumbled onto something new. They have. They just don't know they're describing the same monster. Except that monster refuses to sit still long enough to be described. Some patients spin into insomnia so brutal they cannot sleep for weeks on end, wired and exhausted at once. Others sink so deep into stillness that nurses lean in just to check for a pulse. Occasionally, the same patient does both, days apart, as if the disease can't decide which nightmare to run. The scale, once you add it up, is absurd. Spanish flu, the pandemic everyone still name drops, killed something like 2 people out of every 100 it touched. This thing killed 1 in 2. Worse odds than the flu that gets all the documentaries, running quietly in the same decade. And it wasn't even attacking the lungs. It was going straight for the nervous system, rewiring the machinery that tells a body how to move at all. History picked the wrong pandemic to remember. Europe, meanwhile, has other things on its mind. The war has just finished dismantling a continent, and the 1918 flu is settling in to finish the job. So when doctors spot the new disease, they don't see a 3rd catastrophe. They see shell shock, or influenza with strange manners, something already filed and understood. That filing error costs the investigation years it can never get back. Soldiers demobilizing don't just carry rifles and trench coats home. They carry whatever this is. The disease climbs onto the same troop ships and rail lines built to empty the war, and rides them straight past every border a healthy quarantine might have held. Britain gets it, so does the United States, then Australia, then India, each outbreak arriving with its own local twist, its own confused headline. An epidemic hitching a ride on peace, using the war's own machinery to finish what the war started. Researchers finally get organized, and none of it holds. They culture for bacteria and find nothing conclusive. An autoimmune trigger gets chased down and slips away. A link to strep infections looks promising briefly, then collapses too. Every promising lead dead ends in the same place. No pathogen, no smoking gun, nothing a microscope can pin down. And that early misfiling as flu or shell shock hasn't helped. It's already burned years nobody gets back. The file stays open. It still is. Then, as suddenly as it arrived, the epidemic goes quiet by 1926. No final wave, no announcement, just fewer new cases until there weren't any. But it doesn't take its patients with it. Some walk out recovered. Thousands don't, left in the exact posture the disease left them in, institutionalized, unvisited, and slowly written out of medicine's memory. Some of them would still be there 40 years later. They're still there in 1969, a few boroughs and 4 decades removed from Vienna, filed away in the back wards of Beth Abraham Hospital in the Bronx. Nurses have long since stopped expecting anything from them. Then, a young neurologist named Oliver Sacks starts making rounds and notices what everyone else stopped seeing. Patients frozen since the 20s, still breathing, still in there. He's got a new drug for Parkinson's, and a hunch nobody asked him to have. The drug does something no one on that ward has seen in 40 years. Patients who haven't spoken since the 20s sit up mid-sentence, ask for the date, stand, walk, crack jokes, fall back in love with the century they left. Sacks calls it exactly what it looks like, an awakening. Waking up, though, turns out to be its own emergency. Within weeks, tics start, then hallucinations, then fits of agitation the dose never warned anyone about. Doctors scramble to pull the drug back before the cure outpaces the disease. 40 years undone in days, then immediately, violently, complicated by the very thing that undid it. Sacks does what any good storyteller with a miracle on his hands would do. He writes it down. The case files become a book, and the book becomes something closer to scripture, blurbed by a poet who calls it a masterpiece and handed a prize the following year. A ward full of forgotten statues, dead half a century in the public imagination, resurrected as literature. Hollywood eventually comes calling too. Just don't ask yet how much of it actually happened the way he wrote it. Other neurologists read the book and try to run it back. Nothing happens the way the pages promised. No comparable awakenings, no repeatable dose, no second miracle anywhere else in medicine. And for years, that gap goes politely unmentioned. Everyone keeps quoting the prose. Almost no one can cite the data behind it. A masterpiece, sure, celebrated, prize-winning, adapted for the screen, and standing on evidence that so far, only one man has ever managed to produce. The answer surfaces where confessions usually do, buried in his own private journal, never meant for readers. Sacks admits some of what made Awakening so moving simply wasn't true, pure fabrications, in his own words. The man who made a career diagnosing other people's minds had just diagnosed his own book, and the verdict wasn't flattering. When biographer Lawrence Weschler tracked down the same patients years later, the ward looked nothing like the book. No triumphant walks, no reunions with the century. Just people, in his words, shitting in their pants, drooling. The hope readers had been sold wasn't waiting for him on the other side of those doors. It never had been. Sacks never quite backs down from the miracle, even after admitting to inventing pieces of it. In 1982, he writes that he's grown more optimistic, not less, insisting a real number of these patients went on to do extremely well, calling it an enduring awakening. Language you'd expect from a man defending a diagnosis, not a plot. Maybe some of them really did get better, or maybe the storyteller just couldn't let go, decades on, of his own ending. Von Economo and Cruchet have been dead for decades now, and the file they opened in Vienna is still technically unsolved. No virus was ever isolated. No bacteria was ever proven. Researchers have floated theories for 100 years: strep, autoimmune, some rogue viral cousin nobody's caught, and every one of them still dies on the same evidence table the earlier ones did. A pandemic that killed half the people it touched, and medicine still can't tell you what exactly did the killing. That's the strange shape this legacy ends up taking. The disease gets a best-selling book. It gets a Hollywood adaptation, awards, a poet calling it a masterpiece, decades of audiences crying in theaters over patients who really existed. What it never gets is a diagnosis. Sachs solved the ending, or claimed to, in prose good enough to win prizes. Nobody solved the beginning. Not him, not von Economo, not a century of researchers since. A pandemic famous enough for the multiplex, still unnamed in the file where it started. Weschler's ward wasn't the exception. It was closer to the average. Most of the patients Sachs wrote into hope went back to the same silence, some further gone than before he ever touched them, wrecked by a drug that had promised the opposite. No standing ovations, no happy reunions, just the same rooms, the same stillness, and a book on shelves everywhere insisting otherwise. What's left, in the end, isn't really a medical case. It's a warning about how badly we want sick stories to end well, and how easily a good writer can arrange that ending for us. Nobody ever named what caused encephalitis lethargica. So somewhere out there, right now, another disease nobody's named yet is quietly waiting for its own von Economo and its own Oliver Sacks.